What's up, guys? Max here with another incredibly special and incredibly important episode of the ScuttleButt Show. I brought on a friend of mine today, Jerad. Jerad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Jerad is a retired Army chaplain. Is that correct?
Yep.
And how many years?
Retired Army Chaplain Corps.
How many years were you in the Army?
20.
20 years in the Army, which is amazing. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, it's a good job.
Hell yeah. And now you and I actually live in Okinawa together, even though we're doing this over Zoom. We're all quarantined. We all have stuff going on. So right now, Zoom is the best way to interact with other humans, it seems like. So here we are over Zoom. And I put out kind of an all call on social media last week because I just had enough. So I did a video where I watched an interview between Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw and political commentator Bill Maher. And they had a back and forth, and it kind of went viral because everyone was like, watch Dan Crenshaw obliterate Bill Maher. That's probably the headlines that I got in my curated social media because I follow Dan Crenshaw a lot because I worked with him in the Navy. And so I got all these headlines and I watch it and I did my reaction to it. And in it, I was like, well, you know, this is not a good argument. This is not a good argument. And what I was trying to express, although I'm not always very articulate, is people argue back and forth in what is the English language term is fallacy. Basically an invalid argument. Whether you know you're making an invalid argument or you don't know you're making an invalid argument, a lot of us do it. I'm guilty. I'm sure we are all guilty. A lot of it comes from good intention, and you think you're being rational, but you're really not. But how do you know? How do you know when you're doing it, and how do you know when somebody else is doing it? And so I put out a thing online on social media, and I said, do I know anyone who's intelligent enough on a topic of fallacies that we could have a conversation with it and maybe educate someone in some way on what these are, how often we hear them, how to identify them and combat them and prevent yourself from using them. Jerad, you said you would do this with me. You're retired Army, a whole career in the Army. I can't think of a better person to join me and do it. So thank you for coming on here today.
Yeah, anytime.
And we were just talking about this before, but really quick so people know your background on how you know even what a fallacy is in college, right?
Yeah, it came from being a communications and English major.
And you're college educated, which is more formal education than I have. So this will be a learning experience for me too. I try to be present-minded of things like this, but I definitely am certainly not the subject matter expert. So it'll be good to bounce these ideas off of you. Now, in preparation for this, because I'm like a 5-year-old, I found an image online that highlights the big, most commonly heard logical fallacies, and they used robots to represent the fallacies, and they're having a robot argument. And then it says what fallacy is which, and I'll post that up here on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube, and I'll post it a link to it in the description if you're listening to the podcast. But if we go down the list here, we've got things like hasty generalization, slippery slope, moral equivalence, either or, ad hominem, begging the claim, post hoc ergo, red herring, what do these mean? We're going to go down the list here and talk about them. There's examples, and then we'll maybe use some real world examples that come to mind, and why they invalidate your argument.
Sounds good.
Okay. So first one on the list here, at the top left, is hasty generalization, where the example is the robots saying to the other robot, I have met a few people, and I conclude that all humans are ugly, evil, and smell like socks. In other words, this robot has traveled to Earth, seen a small percentage of the population, and has extrapolated that to cover the whole population. Is that basically? And now, why is this such a invalid argument?
Well, and I've been accused of it myself, and nobody is perfect. But have you ever been discussing something with a friend or relative, and they use the term "you're jumping to conclusions"?
Yes.
That is an example of hasty generalization. It's something that everybody, you know, in the course of, you know, decision making or heated conversation, everybody falls victim to jumping to a conclusion. Something like, my brother eats hamburgers and pizza all the time and he's thin, therefore, hamburgers and pizza don't contribute to obesity. Because you've seen one example of something, it then becomes your standard definition for that topic.
Which of course is not true in every case, and immediately implies that you don't have all of the information needed to come to such a conclusion.
Correct. And it's something you also see in advertising. Like anytime a product in a commercial says, you know, 9 out of 10 doctors agree that Colgate toothpaste is the best toothpaste. That is a perfect example of hasty generalization being inbred into our thought process.
I, as a us as veterans, might say, well, I've been to Iraq. They're all terrorists. That would be a very damaging, dangerous, hasty general. All Muslims are terrorists would be a very, very damaging and dangerous, hasty generalization. That when you say it, you probably know that you have to know that you're wrong. But it's easy to let something like that. People out there do think like that, Yeah. And if you hear somebody say something like that, let's say you've never been in the military and you hear somebody say, I've been to Iraq and I'll tell you all Muslims are terrorists. And then you go, well, he's been to Iraq. He must know. That's how that kind of dangerous idea spreads. Now,
correct.
Of course, somebody who's been to Iraq cannot say how all Muslims are, because you cannot say how all people are, because all people are different and should be judged as individuals, and all circumstances should be judged individually. Is there a population of people who claim to be Muslims and are terrorists? Yes. Does that make all Muslims terrorists? No, not by a long shot. It's ludicrous to think such a thing. This is an example of how dangerous this type of fallacy can be when used to influence a susceptible population who maybe can't identify it. And that's why we're going over these today, because I get so mad when I see these being thrown around, and people, for one, deliberately or inadvertently are using them, and second, people are listening to them. Ugh, so upsetting.
It is, because going off of hasty generalization, all Muslims are terrorists. Well, then it's very easy to slide into another fallacy, being us versus them. Well, if they're all terrorists and we're American patriots, therefore we must fight all Muslims. We must expel them from our country. So fallacy is it's like a breeding monster that can start with one non-intelligent comment and just go in so many directions.
Now, keep in mind, by definition, if you use fallacy in a statement, it invalidates your statement. Is that true?
Yes.
So
I would agree with that.
So
you can't use non-logic to prove logic.
Yes. So if you're out there listening to this and you start identifying these things when you're watching the news, listening to a buddy, listening to a politician, listening to somebody in your family, whatever it is, watch out if your kids are getting you with this, then you have to know when these things are being thrown at you so you can defend against them. And maybe you'll catch yourself using them in conversation. We all do it. So if you catch yourself using them, you might be able to say, whoa, you know what? Let me change what I just said. I was wrong. Don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. Okay. Number 2, slippery slope. This is great. So the example here is, if we act nice to humans now, soon they will demand constant back rubs. The implication here is, if you do something nice for them once, they're just going to assume, they're just going to want more nice things and assume that you're going to keep doing them all the time. And then they're going to get mad if you don't do them. Then they're going to revolt, and then they're going to kill us. The slippery slope that I went down there is, I don't have any facts to back up what I just said at all. In my mind, I just let my own fears develop my thought, and then I said it like as if I know what I'm talking about. Is that a fair representation of slippery slope?
Yes and no. When going through school and having to find an example of slippery slope, I'm sure we've all heard of the book If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. That entire book is nothing but one long slippery slope. It's kind of along the same lines of, oh, if you let 14-year-olds have unsupervised dates, next thing you know, we're going to have a new generation of teenage moms because Gina down the street went on a date and she ended up pregnant. Therefore, all 14-year-old girls are promiscuous and all are bad.
And when, where can you think of any other examples of slippery slope that you see commonly, or that you've seen that have been big standout ones?
A big slippery slope for me, as you know, we kind of talked about in preparation today, was my comment about, you know, the fake news moniker. You know, for example, it starts with, well, Fox News, for example, they got a story wrong. Therefore, all of their reporting for the rest of history is going to be automatically invalid, because once you're wrong, you're always wrong. That comes to mind because that's, I think, the most prevalent fallacy that I see in media today is, if this happens, there's going to be some drastic evil outcome, no matter what the topic is. You know, if the government gives everybody a $1,200 stimulus check, it's just going to make everybody want more money, and then our nation's going to be broke. And it's seeing things like that just makes me grit my teeth, because it's kind of shortchanging the American people, saying, you know, we can't be responsible, or it gives us that generalization, almost like we discussed with all Muslims are terrorists. Well, then all Americans are, you know, greedy and bad with money.
If we do universal basic income, no one's going to work.
Exactly.
And that's how slippery slope starts. And then it's a completely unwarranted speculation. Would you say that that's true?
I would say that. It's like, you know, if you teach it, you know, if you have a kid who's getting ready to be 16 and, you know, they want to start learning how to drive, it's making a huge jump from, well, if we teach little Tommy how to drive the car today, what's next? He's going to want to drive a helicopter? Like, two drastically different things trying to be comparative. It's almost the old antiquation of apples to oranges. And it's very easy with slippery slope to start trying to make an orange turn into an apple, and it's just not going to happen.
Very true. Okay, slippery slope. Now, if you guys have any questions about these or want to comment and have some input, feel free to drop me a line. You can find me everywhere at the ScuttleButt Show. Drop a comment down below if you're listening on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, reach out anywhere on social media, and I'm happy to discuss this stuff with you. Next one is one of my favorite ones because it's really easy to do in a hurry, and it sounds legit. Circular argument. So the example here with the robots are better leaders because of superior leadership skills. Or this apple is delicious because it tastes good. You basically are reinforcing your argument with your original statement, which means you've proven nothing. But in a hurry, it sounds legit. You know, somebody might be like, apple must be good. He said it tastes good, so it's good because it tastes good because it's delicious. How can that be wrong? But it's very wrong. An example of how you would describe an apple. This apple is delicious because it is bitter while also being sweet, because it is 8% acidity mixed with, and you start going through the senses of taste, that trigger your taste buds, and then maybe scientifically prove why this apple is pleasing to your palate. But by saying this apple is tasty because it's delicious is a circular argument. Did I represent that correctly?
Yeah, that's actually one of the best examples I've seen to try to correlate that, because commonly you get people who will, this apple is delicious because this apple is delicious. And the other person says, well, I'm glad you enjoy apples. However, I prefer oranges. Well, no, apples are delicious because apples are delicious. And a lot of people, myself included, get drawn into that fallacy argument under the guise of, I'm simply trying to rephrase what I said because I don't think you understood what I said. And so not being able to back up why your opinion of that apple is so amazing, and just going back into finding 100 different ways to say this apple is delicious definitely fits that definition.
Without getting ahead of ourselves, this one, circular argument, seems to come up a lot in my experience because people are trying to save time, and because the problems that they come up with a lot often are so complex. Like in politics, for example, problems are so complex, truly, that to express them in a reasonable amount of time is virtually impossible, because for one, a lot of politics is subjective, not objective to begin with, when you're talking about governing people. But then also with something like Medicare for all would be better because then everyone would have health care, is a circular argument. But you could never, on a debate stage, go into the intricacies of what a Medicare for all program would entail versus a paid provider, individual provider, capitalism style, normal, traditional healthcare system that we've all been used to, because it just can't be done. So people are happy to accept a circular argument answer in place of an argument that they just don't have the time for. And that's what's really dangerous about circular argument, I think.
Exactly. It definitely lends itself very easily to the fast-paced society in which we live, where we're all connected by social media, with friends, family. News outlets are now streaming 24/7. And so it's very common to human nature to keep up with that pace. You want the information in the quickest form possible. So therefore, if a position of authority, which we'll get into later, says, universal healthcare is good because then all people have healthcare, it is very easy to say, okay, well, this person said this is good, this is why, I don't need the details. And I think that's part of this breeding ground of fallacy, is when we stop asking for details. It's kind of like trying to put together an IKEA bookshelf with Swedish instructions. You can't just follow the pictures.
Beware of the circular argument. Because you'll be inclined to use it and you'll be inclined to fall for it too. I think that this is one of the ones that this or ad hominem might be the two that you are most likely to accept because they're pleasing to you, because they reinforce what you already think or already are willing to accept, which is an easy answer, or reinforcing your own dislike of something. But we'll get to that later in the list. The next one on the list is straw man. In this example, one robot says to the other, "Why do you hate robots so much?" But to clear that up, is another way to say straw man is like putting words in your mouth?
It's more common when someone wants to refute the original point that was made, um, but they're actually trying to argue a point that wasn't made, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, it goes in line with, for example, the current presidency, which I have no opinion one way or the other, but you see a lot of, well, Trump's a billionaire. Back at the beginning of his campaign, he's a billionaire. He's not going to understand, middle class Americans because he's part of the upper class. That's a full on straw man fallacy because at no point was it ever stated that Trump doesn't care about the middle class. It's an assumption that became fact.
And that is a scary idea. An assumption that became fact because this is exactly why we're doing this. Because when you hear it from someone that you believe, you'll repeat it, right? And as these ideas spread, they're hard to trace back to source, right? After a while. And then since you can't trace them back to the source, you start to see so many people echo it, you think, well, this many people wouldn't think it if it wasn't true.
Right.
But
I mean, obscure reference point, totally obscure reference point, but that's how my brain works. Go back to the McCain presidential platform, right? He picked Sarah Palin. And like her or hate her, Saturday Night Live couldn't get enough of her. But you have where she made the remark about you can see Russian land from Alaska. Next thing you know, the straw man fallacy kicks in because you have a comedian who kind of misquotes and says, I can see Russia from my house. So then we all, tended to fall into the joke of she's not going to be a good vice president because she said, yeah, she can see Russia from her house, which is not a point that was made, but it's somebody trying to defend their position of not liking her as a politician by arguing a point that wasn't made.
Now, that's a great example because actually SNL is guilty around with their political commentary, guilty around every corner of a lot of these fallacies. Not that it's not funny and good entertainment, because I love Saturday Night Live, but if you take that as political fact or fact at all, you have to be really careful. I would push back on that because a lot of what they do is straw man, is slippery slope, hasty generalization with a lot of their jokes, because they take out of context quotes and then have behind the scenes conversations leading up to them and following them that are obviously satire, except not obviously for a lot of people. They go, oh, look how smart SNL is and look how stupid the person they're making fun of is. But really none of that's accurate or truthful at all. And then people, especially now, will see something on the internet. People are not attuned to identifying fact and fiction on the internet. And let's say, I'm just going to say I'm hesitant. I could easily put on blast for this, but I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm like 100% sure there's someone out there who's seen an SNL skit and didn't know it was a joke. Someone on the internet. And then
I would not be surprised. I mean, you have entire websites such as The Onion, where satire is basically built on straw man fallacy. But there's always one in a friend, as we say in the Army, that the message, they're high speed, low drag, and they don't understand this is in the realm of satire. And the next thing you know, you've got, GI Army talking to Joe Navy, and GI Army looks over and says, yeah, did you see that that interview that Sarah Palin did where she said she could see Russia from her house, and it just breeds from there. But to clarify, as somebody who was stationed in Alaska for an unusually long amount of time, you can see the border of Russia from the inlet of Alaska. Just
boom. You heard it here on the ScuttleButt Show. Okay. I mean, it looks that way on a map. Okay. Straw man. So that's straw man all the time in comedy, all the time. The next one is either or, and this is great because this is a good one too. Either or. Robot says to other robot, is it better to destroy the humans than let the humans destroy us? The statement here is either we're going to destroy the humans or the humans are going to destroy us. But one of those two conclusions is the only possible conclusion and nothing else can exist.
Yeah. It's also commonly a false dilemma. It's like saying in Latin America, only two countries allow tourism, Mexico and Guatemala. So pick one because those are your only options. And it's like, no, you've got Argentina, you've got a lot more than just Guatemala and Mexico. But it's a common tactic for somebody trying to make an argument to persuade you to agree with them because they're going to give you two options. And one is generally always going to be beneficial to their viewpoint. And one is going to be some horrible, evil, anti-option almost. Because you're more inclined to want to go with the better looking option rather than doom and gloom and absolute despair.
You can vote for me or you can flush the country down the toilet.
Pretty much.
So, I'm not going to flush the country down the toilet. I guess I'll vote for you. But those were never your only two options. In fact, those aren't even two real options, Those could be, you could be faced with two totally fictional things. The thing that benefits the person who's presenting the option might not even actually be an option. It might be a trick. It might be a false front where you think that you're getting suckered into, or you think that you're getting a good deal, but you're actually not. You're just agreeing with them so that they can further a totally separate cause. Like, let's say somebody's trying to, you can buy my shoe cleaner or you can light your shoes on fire. Well, you buy their shoe cleaner, but you didn't even actually there was never any this person's not even a shoe cleaner salesman. They just hustled you out of your money and then they ran away after you got their money. They just set a big game about shoe cleaner and scared you. You were so focused on being scared of your shoes being on fire that you bought their shoe cleaner, but really you were just hustled out of your money completely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's often that it's often seen as like a last resort in an argument for somebody to go into false dilemma or either, or it's kind of, like ultimatum-ish. You can either agree with me that, I don't know, taupe is the best color carpet on earth, or, your floors are all going to be plywood and you're going to get splinters. Neither of which is a true statement. I mean, I personally, I don't like carpet. I have hardwood floors. I'm anti-carpet because of reasons. Like, I don't like to vacuum. I don't like allergens. I have 3 cats and a dog. I don't like fur gathered up everywhere. So I could very easily say, well, it's either a hardwood floor or get rid of all the pets. Neither one is realistically always going to happen, but you're more inclined, because I'm going to tug on your heartstrings, you're going to agree with me that we can have hardwood floors because the pets, they're living sentient being. And that's generally what you see is one thing's rosy and one thing is meant to cause distressing emotion.
That's scary. When if you're presented with an either or, you should always suspect that the person presenting it has an ulterior motive. And that would be the time when you say, whoa, 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 whoa. This argument contains a major fallacy. I need you to explain yourself because you've just given me an either or, and I don't actually believe that those are the only two options. Don't you think it's possible there is a third, fourth, or fifth option? And here's some examples. And then that person should have to respond to your challenge. If not, then you might see something like, oh, well, forget you anyway. And then you know that you should never have been listening to them in the first place.
Exactly. It's something we're currently seeing now. It's an election year. It's a presidential election. And you can either vote Republican and make America great again, or you can vote Democrat and they're going to take all your guns. But nobody, or not enough people, I shouldn't say nobody, but not enough people are willing to step back and say, well, hey, there's the Libertarian Party, there's the Green Party, there's independence. It's not an either or. And so if you're telling, obviously in this argument, if you're telling me, oh, the Republican Party is going to make America great again, or the Democratic Party is going to take your guns, first off, I'm going to assume you lean more Republican because that's the better of the two options. But the minute I say, well, what about independent? If they cannot logically hear that option and say, well, comparing Republican to independent, these are my thoughts, then it's just a fallacy argument trying to sway your belief to one side or the other.
And we're about to start, getting halfway through the list here. And there are a lot more fallacies and a lot more that you can educate yourself on fallacies. These are some of the most common and easy to detect logical fallacies is what they're called. And I encourage you to do more research as we go. And I hope that this is helpful. But like I said, if you have anything you want to add or any further questions or good examples of how this happened to you, please let us know. The next one on the list, it names it post hoc ergo or propter hoc, but is another way to say this. If A is B and B is C, then A must be C.
Yes, it's the find a thing here.
The example is
Mary wore her favorite necklace to school today. Mary got an A on her spelling test. Therefore, the necklace must be lucky and caused the grade on the spelling test, not the fact that Mary studied for 3 hours the night before.
A great example that I was going to bring up here, and I'll just read the robot example real quick. The robot says to the other robot, I met a human, and then I began malfunctioning. Humans are to blame. Here's the example I was going to use. Since 2016, the American economy has achieved heights it has never achieved before. Trump did it. So obviously that is post hoc ergo, A is B, B is C, A is C, which in mathematics might be true, but in sense of a logical fallacy, it's commonly used to disguise truth and trick you into thinking something that's not true by saying, if A is B and then B is C, A must be B, A must be C equal, or the cause of C. But that's not the case. It can have nothing to do with it and seem like a really compelling argument. I loved your example about the necklace because in your example, you alluded to, or you said that the actual reason she did well is because she studied for 3 hours, which is it's like the tip of the iceberg, right? Is the post hoc ergo, is what you see, but the truth is what you can't see. But the problem is there's so much more of that. Your mind is ready and willing to accept the lie instead of having to deal with what might be getting to the bottom of the truth.
Right. And it's not always willing to accept a lie rather than the truth. It's even certain things like a lot of my friends are sport fans, and that's great for them. Um, and you always hear, like, athletes that have rituals, like, I have to wear green socks because the Green Bay Packers are playing. And if I don't wear green socks, they won't get a touchdown. Therefore, green socks equals touchdown. Um, and the example you touched on with the economy, Trump was president, therefore it must be Trump that did it, because it's easier to have, again, with that speed of society, A equals B gives you a result of C, rather than having to actually stop and say, well, and I should phrase this, I'm not anti any political candidate. I am not anti the president, but it's easier for the media to put a blurb out there and say, Trump was president, therefore he fixed the economy, rather than have to go into the details of, well, the last 2 years of Obama's presidency, he dealt a lot with economy and foreign trade and public relations. So in some respects, Trump inherited the fruits of Obama's labor. Now, I'm not saying Trump has done nothing for the economy. You just can't, it's a fallacy to make a blanket statement of A equals B, therefore C is always going to be the same.
Yeah, and that's the reason I brought that one up in particular, is because I hear it on the streets all the time. I hear it at a bar. I hear it from people. And it's usually something like this, like, hey, the economy, Trump. And then it's the end of the conversation. And so that's that.
Then you hit today's news where, like, the economy is not so great, but they don't want to say Trump was president, the economy has gone down, therefore Trump must have damaged the economy. And that, again, is another fallacy argument.
Yes. So good, because it's an example of how when you use a fallacy, you shouldn't shy away from using it in the reverse direction. If you would, you should cue in that your argument is bad. Because if you would say the economy is doing well, Trump, fuck yeah, then you should also be willing to say, if the economy is doing bad, Trump, right?
Exactly.
If you're not, there's probably something wrong with your argument. You're probably not making a good point, right? Because
exactly, you're going into circulars, you're going into post hoc, you're setting up your own straw man. It's one of those, like, have you ever had a conversation where you feel like using the phrase, or have ever used the phrase, I've tried to explain this to you until I'm blue in the face? If you're having that kind of conversation, then one or both of the people in the conversation are debating each other by using counter fallacy. So there will be no conclusion. There will be no, peaceful resolve, because this side of fallacy is saying ABC, and this side is saying, well, no, my ABC is more correct. And fallacy versus fallacy, you can't have logic, so you can't have resolution.
Yeah, and it's really tough. And I get why it's so tough, because what if every question the public asked a politician was answered with, "It's so complicated. How much time do you have? Like, do you have a month? Could you quit your job and come to my office so we can look at the books together? So the fact that if that's not the answer, it's our fault. It's our fault as consumers. It's our fault as voters. It's our fault because we demand a right now, in your face answer, perfect answers, answers that back up what you're already thinking. So in that regard, we are creating the fallacy it's the only thing that'll satisfy us, is basically an invalid argument, because we won't accept how complex these problems actually are, and that's why we end up with so many invalid arguments and fallacy-based arguments.
Well, yeah, it's the inbreeding of generations of the human instinct for instant gratification. We don't want 3 months worth of details. We want the end result. We want it now. Just like, you know, again with the stimulus, there were plenty of people in the media and on the street saying they're dragging their feet, they're dragging their feet. But when you try to say, well, it's much more than just, hey, we're going to give everybody money, there's a lot of moving parts to it. They don't want to hear the moving parts. They want to hear what's in it for me and how soon can I get what I now feel entitled to.
Yeah. So look out for this one because you're probably doing it all the time. And it's easy to feel correct because it validates your argument, except it actually does the opposite. You feel like you feel like you're right. You feel like it's smart, but it's actually the opposite.
Kind of one of those, like, if you think everybody you run across is an asshole, it might not be everybody else that you need to look at.
Yeah, very true. I love that. Very true. Okay. Number 7 on our list here is the red herring fallacy. Here's the robot example. You say we should work alongside humans, but what about the human who short-circuited my friend? Oh man, where to begin? Because this one is this is dangerous. Like slippery slope or hasty generalization is dangerous, but this one specifically in this example and in the main examples I see, target people.
Well, red herring is less about like targeting a person as it is using irrelevant information to try to distract from the fact that you have no argument, such as there are starving children in Africa, eat your carrots. Or how is all this talk about anti-vaccination versus vaccination going to help cure cancer? It's something that the anti-vax conversation has nothing to do with finding a cure for cancer. But because I don't have a valid argument for anti-vaccination, I have to pull something else in to try to cover up or to distract you from what we're actually discussing. It would be like, we start this podcast today and you're like, we're going to talk about fallacies. And I'm like, yeah, fallacies are great. However, did you watch the ball game last night? And, what's fallacies gonna, how is talking about fallacies gonna help solve world hunger? Because it's a common tactic for somebody who has no leg to stand on.
I think, so thank you. That was a good description of it. I was picturing different examples in my head. This seems like it's very, okay. So in the politics sense, this is something I see a lot. When a politician is asked a question that is actually a really good question, they divert into something unrelated, and then that is the red herring in that instance.
Exactly. It's, gosh, man, things I haven't even thought about since high school. But it's like in debate class, one of the first things you're taught to successfully debate is, if you don't have an answer, pivot to your strong point. And again, it goes back to, you saw a lot of it with McCain and Palin's vice presidential run, where if she was asked a question about global warming, she would say, global warming is a thing, but here's something I really want to talk about first. And she would go into her strong suit, because that's, as humans, we know we perform best when we're discussing a particular area where it's a strong suit or a strong skill, because it's fight or flight almost. Nobody wants to perceive as having a shortcoming or a weakness, especially in serious conversation like politics. Because if you're asked a question as a politician and you don't have what would be a solid answer, and you put something out there like, Ronald Reagan said trees cause air pollution, And so rather than pivot to a strong suit, he said something that the world laughed about for a while. I still chuckle about it every now and again, but it's trying to divert from saying, I don't know, because nobody likes to say, I don't know. So it's easier to say, that's a great question, but let's talk about this first, hoping you're going to forget what you asked me.
Yep. Yep. And I see that often. Let me just say really quick. I would encourage people to be more willing to accept the answer, I don't know. Because if you're not willing to accept the answer, I don't know, you're saying you're willing to accept a lot of bullshit in its place, because no one knows everything and you want them to. So you're perfectly happy to accept or reject bullshit instead of accepting, I don't know. But an example of red herring might be, you tell me if this is a true example. If somebody says, well, don't you think it would be good if we could give healthcare to everyone, because a lot of people could use that benefit? And then the person being asked the question says, the problem with socialism is no society has ever succeeded in socialism. What, do you want to end up like Venezuela?
Exactly. That is a perfect example, because you've not been asked about socialism, but you know that a majority of people are going to equate a national healthcare system with socialism. So you're pandering to the wider audience, I should say, which is aggravating and it's annoying. And you're going to give, generally, when a politician pivots to a different topic, they're going to give you this long, horrible answer and then move on to the next person. Because again, the whole purpose of a red herring is to make you forget what the actual question was. That would be like a math teacher saying, what's 2 plus 2? And little Johnny saying, hey, in science class, we talked about, what happens when you mix vinegar and baking soda, and ask, wanting to expand on that. And the teacher's going to answer that. And then next thing you know, the teacher's like, now what were we talking about? And a lot of times that's how you spot a red herring fallacy, is when you're talking to someone and you go, wait a minute, how did we even get on this topic?
Yeah. And so that's a good way to identify it. If you find yourself being the one who's guilty of the red herring, but it's not on purpose, maybe you didn't even know you were doing that until you listened to this, and now you see yourself doing it and you're like, wait, I'm too far from where we started. I am diverting the conversation. I am dodging the question. Because not only do you end up dodging the question, but let's say here's how, to me, it seems so dangerous, is not only did you dodge the question, but the people who are listening might have also forgotten the original question. And now they're like, oh yeah, fuck socialism. I don't want to end up like Venezuela. In fact, the person who asked the original question is a socialist and is anti-American. So screw you. But that was never even brought to the table. It was never. In fact, the person that you're supporting is the only person with that on their mind. So
exactly. And if you're asked about universal health care and the answer you get in return is, all about socialism, then you're also falling into, again, slippery slope. If we start a national health care plan, the next thing's going to be, some drastic form of communism. We're going to become a communist nation in the next 5 years because we allowed healthcare today.
Yeah, if we allow healthcare today, what's next?
Yeah. It's give a mouse a cookie kind of thinking, but unfortunately, because not a lot of people take the time to realize what kind of information they're being given, and then a lot of people don't turn around and question those answers, we're all much more susceptible to falling victim to fallacy and then running with it.
So that's red herring. Very dangerous, very easy to fall for, because people who are good at it and know what they're doing will have you tripping over your own thoughts and forgetting where you even started and maybe even thinking that you were wrong. So be careful if you find yourself getting attacked with red herring, and be careful that you're not allowing yourself to get too distracted from what's going on, because the person you're listening to is such a good public speaker. They're such a charismatic person. That's the person who's going to be best at getting you with this kind of thing.
Definitely. If you ever find yourself in a conversation and you have to go, wait, how did we get to this topic? That's when you know you need to stop and go back, retrace your steps in your conversation to what the actual question was, and then address that question so that you are productively resolving whatever topic you're discussing.
Yeah, this feels like it's probably the number one fallacy you see on a debate stage when politicians are up there, is red herring.
It's like the number one fallacy argument you see in marriage, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It starts with, why didn't you load the dishwasher? And next thing you know, you're talking about 6 months ago when you didn't power wash the driveway.
Oh, man. That is no joke. Fuck. Okay. The next one on the list is genetic fallacy. So basically, here, I'll read the robot example. All humans start out as incompetent babies, so they must grow up to become incompetent babies. The idea is, if you assume based on where something's from, what it's going to turn into, there is in many cases, in as far as this conversation goes, there is usually no evidence to support that.
Right. It's almost the same as what we call a sweeping generalization, such as dogs are good pets, coyotes are genetically ancestor to dogs, therefore a coyote would make a good pet.
I think I've had that actual conversation before.
Right? Or things like tigers and lions are killers and predators, therefore house cats must also be killers and predators. Mm-hmm. It also goes into the very first example when we started today, that all Muslims must be terrorists because they're all from the Muslim faith, which is generally all Middle Eastern. So then you get into, so now all Middle Eastern people are bad.
This is one where you might see a lot of your unconscious bias prevail, because you don't actively think about something like that. I don't think too many people wake up in the morning and the first thought in their mind is about large groups of populations they hate. I don't think most people are racist. I don't think most people are homophobic. I don't think the overwhelming majority of people don't fall into that category. But presented with the right situation, you might act that way. So would a good example be you're in a bad neighborhood and someone who looks suspicious is walking down the street, so you start to believe that they would assault you?
Yeah, that would be a good example. If I live in a bad neighborhood and I really hesitate on this because I know how bad it sounds, but it's one of those, if I live in a bad neighborhood and I got jumped by an African American male, then every African American male in my neighborhood must be a gangster. And that's how it starts. It's that sweeping generalization that because one person of this demographic behaves like this or represents like this, then all people of that demographic must be that same way.
Yeah. And I think it's good that you said that too, because it's a perfect example. And the point of saying that is it's flawed thinking, right? So
right.
It's an example of what's not true. Okay. Just so everyone understands. It's the whole if you hear someone, they get up on their soapbox and they start talking like that, because those are the it seems like what scares me, and I say this a lot, is the most extreme people seem to be given the largest platforms nowadays. And even, and it's kind of true, it's true because okay, let's go back. I had an incredible conversation yesterday with Joe Musselman. We published that episode 48, I believe, or maybe 45. Anyway, with Joe Musselman, it came out yesterday. So, which was May 5th. So, he was talking about growing up watching the Newsies, right? And let's imagine it's like 50 years ago, 60 years, maybe longer. Let's say it's like 100 years ago, because it's 2020 now. So like 1920, people on the street with newspapers. It's the end of the world. It's the end of the world. Get your newspaper. It's the end of the world. Literally getting up on a soapbox, yelling, it's the end of the world, because you're not going to buy a newspaper where the main headline article is the world's normal like yesterday. But you might buy one where it says, this is the end of the world. And the reason I brought that up is because now the news seems to, if somebody has something really extreme to say, the news will entertain it and play it. Even if their whole point is like, this is going viral because of how insane it is. Well, you're still giving it a voice, right? And a lot of times those extreme ideas are genetic fallacies. They're saying, don't you know somebody who fits this description, right? So doesn't it make sense that everyone's like that, you know?
Yeah.
And it's there's no evidence to support that. There's no evidence to support that somebody who looks a certain way in a certain place will act a certain way. And if you start acting, so in the example that you gave, if you start assuming that everyone from that neighborhood is going to jump you, your behaviors might become the dangerous one.
Exactly. And it's even scary to think that, it's starting to go beyond, just like genetic marking, like, for example, reality television.
Love it.
Jersey Shore. It's one of those, if you've never been to Jersey and you don't know anybody from Jersey, so your only exposure's been Jersey Shore, you now assume it's an entire state of people who are Cheeto orange and act like Snooki, because that's all you've been exposed to. So it's very easy to make sweeping generalizations. Same thing with, if you've never met, a gay man or a lesbian before, and all you have to base it on is some media caricature of that demographic, then that's your assumption of how that entire community must be, because it's all you know of it. So it's very easy to fall into, all people of this demographic must be this way. There's no convincing me otherwise.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, please. That's why I asked you to come on here. But it seems true also that you could become a genetic fallacy on purpose, because you believe, hey, I'm from Jersey. People expect me to act like I'm from Jersey, and now being from Jersey means Jersey Shore. I should act like Jersey Shore.
Yeah, that's very easy to fall into. I mean, from experience, being a gay man and being a young gay teenager at one point many, many years ago, the only representation of my demographic that I saw was a show on Showtime, Queer as Folk. That's all I knew of people like me. And so in my early teenage years, I thought that's what it meant to be who I am. I have to act that way, or talk that way, or dress that way to be accepted, because that's all I know. So it's very easy as you said, for yourself to become part of that generalization and become part of that problem in changing the actual perception.
Yeah. I'm thankful that I, at a young age, actually, without knowing even what this is, I've rejected that idea because, hey, I'm a New Yorker, I'm from New York. There's, you got to talk a certain way. You got to be a certain way. Luckily, when I was young, I didn't, as you can tell, I'm not even good at imitating where I'm from. When I was young, that wasn't me. That wasn't who I was. So I never became that to the point where I couldn't shake it, and to me, no one's really that way. No one's, because no such large population of people are the same. You've turned yourself into something to fit in, but it wasn't who you always were destined to turn out to be. Like if you wouldn't have become that person if you lived somewhere else. That's my point. You wouldn't have become the New Yorker if you were born in California, bro. You would have been a surfer or whatever.
Exactly. We all fall into one type of demographic or clique or another. And like you said, like my husband's from New York, and every so often to make me laugh, he will bust into that, "What's the problem with you? What's the matter for you?" And he'll do it, and I'll turn around and be like, "Don't use that fake New York shit with me." Just as, easy as it is, I'm from the Midwest. Most of my life was raised in the Midwest. So therefore, I understand how a farm works. But I don't walk around in, skin tight Levi's and a cowboy hat all the time. I mean, it's one of those, when you're growing up, yeah, you're gonna assimilate with your with your local culture. It's not until you either A, travel, or B, allow yourself to befriend somebody who's outside of your bubble that you really start to realize not only who other people are, but who you are.
Yep, that is so true, dude. That is so freaking true. If I could tell a bullied kid one piece of advice, I've thought about this, as I've gotten older, it would be to travel. That would be it. Hey, you're bullied. That's hard. You know what you need to do? You need to travel. You need to travel until you find somewhere. You'll find many places where you'll see so many different people. You'll realize you fit in and are accepted in so many places. You just happen to be in a bad one now. That is not the world. You just have to.
I think everybody should go to Austin, Texas and Seattle, Washington. Keep it weird and you will be okay.
Yeah, true. Both of those places. Portland. Yeah, those are fun spots. You know what? This perfect, so that's genetic fallacy. This is perfect segue into the next one, which is ad populum fallacy. And the example here is one robot saying to the other, "Hey, where's your robot pride?" I could say like, "Come on, man, you're not even a real New Yorker. That's not the type of pizza that we like." So if you say, "Hey, you're not even a real New Yorker," you're appealing. Actually, I started reading this and I was going to use the word appealing, but it's actually in the definition here. You're appealing to my emotional circuits instead of presenting facts. Basically, you're trying to get me to agree with you because I should feel guilty for not agreeing with you, but you still have yet to show any kind of good argument.
Right. And it's a lot like we were just talking about. And it falls into things as simple as, oh, the Philadelphia Flyers. I am not a fan of the Gritty, okay? I think it's the worst mascot I've ever seen in my life. However, you can't be a real Philadelphia Flyers fan if you don't like Gritty. I'm like, no, I can like the team without liking I compare Gritty to being a fully idealized face of the herpes. It's just, I think it is the worst mascot ever. But it doesn't mean I'm any less of a fan of that team because I don't like their mascot. But that is a fallacy argument that people who love Gritty will make.
Can you Do you have any examples for ad populum from like common things you see on TV, on the news, or in politics or anything?
You don't.
Is people, the term is identity politics. Would you say identity politics is in the ad populum category here?
Yeah, I would say politics fit into it. I think, every time you hear somebody disagree with something with Trump, you have, you know, the Trump followers. Well, you must not be a true American if you can't support our president and everything he does. And that's the one I see prevalently a lot, is calling my nationality into question because I disagreed with one man on one topic. I must no longer be patriotic. Military service means nothing because I didn't agree with the 17-day delay in the presidential response to the COVID-19 virus coming to America. So because I didn't agree with something, I'm not, it's almost bandwagon. If you're not with us, you're against us. You can't be this if you believe that.
You know why that's such a good example too? That when you say that is because when you say exactly the example you used, well, you're not a real American then. Well, what did you say? And what's the logical response? Well, I actually was in the Army for 20 years. You could expound upon that. But the problem is you're in a defense position now when you shouldn't be. In fact, it should be the opposite. But you've been backed into a position where you have to now qualify yourself. But you really don't. The other person has no point, and their accusations are baseless, and they have no actual background on you. Yet the instinct would be to be offended, be upset, and feel like you need to now qualify yourself to validate your position. But in fact, none of that's necessary. The focus should remain on the original challenge because they didn't present any facts to begin with. They challenged you baselessly and distracted from the point, which is they have no claim. And if you go down that road, well, we're back to, wait, how did we even get here? Why are we even talking about my Army career when we were supposed to be talking about COVID? Meanwhile,
Exactly.
and that's exactly what they want because it distracts from their defenseless argument.
Exactly. And I can't tell you like how many times, just like in social media, where military decisions are made, and I've said publicly, I don't think that's a smart idea. And instantly you get attacked by the, us and them, or red herring of, well, you must not be patriotic and you must not be a true American because you don't agree with this policy. And then it's very natural to say, actually, just so you're more educated of who you're talking to, I was in the Army for X amount of years and I performed this MOS. So I think in this standard, I know what I'm talking about. Because the downfall that I think everybody falls into sometimes with 24-hour connectivity is it's very, very much easier to get baited into some kind of online argument because you're behind a keyboard, they're behind a keyboard. It's, well, you don't know me. I now feel attacked. So if I feel attacked, not only do I have to justify why I have my viewpoint, but it's the struggle to justify a viewpoint without making it a personal thing. Because then you're going to end up with, well, how did we get here? And have I said something I will regret later? Like they flung mud at me, so am I now just in it to see how many jabs I can take back?
it reminds me of a video I saw on Facebook. You know, funny that we're talking about it. So true. It was this guy on a motorcycle, and the video was like, car cuts off motorcycle or something, and the motorcycle pulls up next to the car, and the person in the car, the passenger, is recording the video, and the person on the motorcycle goes, "You need to slow down and stop at stop signs. I'm a Marine," and saying you're Marine means nothing in this instance. But then the other guy says, "Well, I was in the Army," and now they are not even talking about road safety.
Yeah, now you have Army versus Marine, or the ever popular Army versus Navy, especially around football time.
Yep.
That's the biggest bone of contention. I got to move so I can plug this computer in.
Sure.
That's the biggest day of the year in our household, is Army versus Navy Day.
Oh yeah, Army versus Navy is an incredible day. I love that.
Great day.
Great day.
This year wasn't as great as last year, but you know.
Well, let's not. How did we get here?
Exactly. Now we're going to spend 20 minutes arguing over football teams that neither one of us play for.
Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. All right. So that's ad populum. We're on the last 3 of 14. The next one is moral equivalence. And this is good. The robot example is, the humans who make me do math for them are worse than Magma Droid, melter of hard drives. It's like saying you're a Nazi if you voted for Trump. Like,
yeah, that's something or the opposite. You must be a Nazi because you didn't vote for Trump.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that whole generalization that this is worse than this other horrible alternative. Like, doing dishes is worse than doing the laundry. There's no real comparison. There's no real factual basis for why is doing dishes worse than doing the laundry. What is so horrible about doing the dishes that you have to pull this actually not pleasant thing and try to compare it? Like, and it's all in trying to recognize when the person you're having a conversation with falls into, oh, well, that's going to be worse than, again, jumping to conclusions and going into another fallacy, because this is so much worse. Because, again, all fallacy is meant to make an emotional appeal on some level, some way. But to go with, like the robot, humans who make me do math for them are worse than the melter of hard drives. What's the basis? What's the reasoning behind that? Is it because you're the robot who doesn't like to do math? So you find, I mean, we all have that one thing we don't like to do. You know, there's always something, like, you know, I don't like crawling underneath my car to change the oil. It's inconvenient and I don't like doing it. Therefore, to me, in that argument, you know, it's like changing the oil on the car, you know, is worse than, I don't know, facing certain death in the Hunger Games.
I love that example. Do you know what comes to mind here? And if you're listening, have you seen the trend? If I said you're a Trump supporter, you're worse than a Nazi, and then that person has to go, are you kidding me? The Nazis were responsible for the deaths of 50 million people, and they tried to take over the world. Well, what are you doing? You have shifted away from the original discussion, and you are now going through comparing everything you know about Nazis to whatever you're being charged with. And the other person might even say, yeah, but the Nazis also did A, B, and C, which is what you're doing. And you are not talking about the original problem again.
Exactly. It's again, as we've seen time and time again, this is why it's very easy to go from fallacy to fallacy if one of the two people in the conversation don't catch on and stop when it begins, because, oh, you're not a Trump supporter, you must be a Nazi. How can you compare me to this group of people who committed mass genocide, XYZ about the Nazis, XYZ about post-war Germany, and then but at the end of the day, we really didn't get to the basis of why it's so bad that I'm not a supporter of Trump.
Yep.
Or why I am a supporter of Trump, because it goes both ways.
Yep, exactly. The original problem was you disagreed about who you, in this instance, about whether you support the president or not, but you never even got to why. You never even got to what you like, what you don't like, what some possible resolutions are to your problems. You just were faced with moral equivalence, and in the face of moral equivalence, you went to into defense mode and shifted completely into how you are not what you're being accused of, but you haven't been justifiably accused of anything.
Exactly.
These are baseless accusations made to distract from the original point, and now you've played right into it.
Exactly. Like it falls into pulling irrelevant information into an argument. Because I didn't look at you and say, "Oh, you're not a Trump supporter, therefore you're a Nazi because you run around screaming, 'I hate Jewish people.'" Like, I've made no actual basis of comparison.
Yep. Yep.
I've simply brought something up so that you're distracted enough with a hot topic word like Nazi, because most often that's when you're going to get this fallacy. They're going to take something that they can't defend or attack, and they're going to find the next hot topic thing that's current to society at that point, because they know it's a button presser for a majority of Americans at this time. Like, oh, you must not you don't support Trump, therefore you must support our states are being held hostage with these lockdowns. Nobody said you voted for or against a lockdown. It wasn't even your decision. However, that's the issue of the day, is protesting these lockdowns. So I know I can elicit a response out of you for that. And you're going to ignore the fact that I've attacked you as a person because you don't agree with my candidate or you don't agree with my position.
Yeah, and the people who do in the moral equivalence example, the people who do the accusing, in a lot of these examples actually, and again, I want to be clear, you can do this without even knowing it. You can, in fact, most people probably don't know they're doing it, and that's why I wanted to do this whole thing. You could charge someone in the moral equivalence category, and if they slip into a defensive position, it's like smelling blood in the water. You're just going to attack even harder because you feel like you've got them on their heels. Like you might get them to change their position because in the face of being accused of supporting the loss of livelihood of millions of Americans during the shutdown, that is such a horrible thing to be guilty of in your mind, that you would do anything to not let public opinion shift to that of you, that now not only can you not discuss the original claim, but you see the mob mentality, the bandwagon growing, and all you can do is dig out of it, right? And before you know it, you've lost big time, and the person doing it feels like they've made a good point, you know?
Right.
But none of that happened.
You have just proven my point to me because of your response, because of your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I've compared you to, this angry, this angry thing, and you did exactly what I thought you would do, and you responded with anger. Therefore, you might feel like you won, but all you did was prove my non-existent point that I think I was trying to prove in the first place.
Yep. And then you might say, well, the guilty don't run, but if you're just If you're minding your own business and people start chasing you with pitchforks and you run, you're not guilty. You're being chased. You know?
It's one of those, it takes having to recognize, A, that you're being baited into a senseless argument. To be able to say, you know what? Let it go. If someone looks at me and says, you don't you don't agree with the state's or the stay-at-home order for your state, you must be a communist. It's being able to step back and say, well, if that's what you want to think, that's fine.
Yep. I think in a lot of these instances, if you the problem with a lot of these is even if you've noticed it's happening to you, you might also notice there's little you can do unless the person who's on the other side of it is willing to be aware of what they're doing. Because if they're not, you're not going to be able to change their mind. You're not going to be able to rationalize because they're going to be so committed to their position, because it seems the problem with fallacies is they seem right if you don't know what's wrong with them. That's why.
Exactly. And with a lot of fallacy argument, the person using the fallacy, I tend to compare to a pit bull with a bone. Even if you stop and say, hey, I've recognized what's going on here, I'm going to withdraw from this conversation, they're still going to continue picking at you like a pit bull chewing on a bone until they get the ultimate answer of, okay, you're right. Just for the sake of ending this argument, you are right. They don't care if you actually agree with them or not. They just want to hear that they're validated, they're right, they're correct, and their assumptions are now no longer fallacy to them, but fact.
Yep. Seeking vindication. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. So that's moral equivalence. We are on to the next one is begging the claim. Here we go. Very common. Very common. Every protest for everything that's ever happened. So there's people there guilty of begging the claim. So robot example. These evil humans need to be stopped. Further explanation here is you must prove they are evil before using it in your argument. So if you picket something and you say, let's say it's, I'm trying to think of like a popular protest chants, like dump Trump or something like that.
There's dump Trump. There's we should boycott McDonald's because they refuse to pay their workers $15 an hour. You know, they underpay their labor, therefore they're an evil business.
Mm-hmm.
Or Trump is an evil man because he maintains the presidency, but is still personally invested in his personal businesses.
Yeah.
Pretty much any boycott you come across, the purpose is to try to make the subject of the boycott the absolute evil, the absolute enemy.
Mm-hmm. And the person on the other side, not the person who's doing begging the claim or begging, you could say begging the question. The question that you should have is why. So you should be asking, why is this the case? And I think you'll find often it's not what it appears to be on the surface. But again, this is an example of when the facts, the real truth is complicated. And to get into it is difficult. So what you end up with are catchphrases and slogans and signs and quick sound bites that seem to prove a point, but really they're all guilty of begging the claim, which is none of them answer the question why. Is that accurate?
Right. That's half of it. It also falls under try to find an example here. There's a red carpet event and like the Met Gala, for example, and you happen to say, I don't like Gwyneth Paltrow's dress. And so the other person in the room says, well, that dress was designed by Alexander McQueen. Are you saying you know more about fashion than a fashion designer? It's almost, it works in two ways. It's questioning your understanding of the subject or your level of education in the subject on one hand, and then you also have the questioning in boycott with this particular company or person we're boycotting is bad because they're bad. Well, why are they bad? And then again, on the other hand, in the other example, it's now that you've posed a disagreement to something, I may have liked her dress, but because you didn't like it, now I'm going to call you out and say, well, you're not a fashion designer, so who are you to have an opinion different than mine? And it goes back to the Marine on the motorcycle and the soldier in the car. Who are you to attack me without knowing me? So now you're instantly, in that example, defensive of why you didn't like this dress, or you're in the position of being attacked with the boycott example because I'm going to tell you boycott Starbucks because their coffee beans are sourced in a third world country by 6-year-old children. So if you drink Starbucks, you're a bad person. So it's either questioning your integrity or knowledge or attacking your moral character.
So so I understand. It's saying the way that this distracts from the original point is, again, puts you in a position on the receiving end of, if you don't change your position, you're admitting to being evil.
Yeah, it falls into being closely related to the homonym type of fallacy, where
which is the
I'm
next,
going to attack your character because you don't agree with my stance. I think Starbucks is evil, but you're holding a Starbucks cup. Therefore, you are evil because you support evil corporation. But if you turn around and ask that person, well, why do you not like Starbucks? Because then that person begging the question has to have some kind of stance. And, even if it's, well, their coffee's too expensive. Okay, so you would attack an entire corporation because you think their product is overpriced. Well, then why not state, I don't like Starbucks because I feel their product is too expensive, rather than you shouldn't drink Starbucks because they're a bad company.
Yeah. Yep. This is it's so interesting talking through this. Is, for one, extremely enlightening, and I've come to conclusions here that I didn't even know we were going to get to, like the way that you end up having to shift when you're on the receiving end of a fallacy argument. You usually have to end up shifting into defending something that was never even originally part of the point, and how big of a part of that this whole thing is. So I hope people are listening and thinking how they can apply this into their lives. So there's one more. So that's begging the claim. And there's one more on the list here on these. And these are not all of the fallacy arguments that exist. These are some of the most common top logical fallacies that you encounter daily. And you had just mentioned this, which is ad hominem, which is when you don't agree with a point, so you attack the person, the character of the person or entity making the point, instead of disputing the point. And the example here is, it's the last one. So in this one, it's the opposite robot talking to the robot who's making all these other fallacy arguments. And it says, I conclude you should not be debating while you are malfunctioning. What's happening here is one robot says to the other, hey, I'm saying you're malfunctioning, And so your arguments are meaningless.
Right.
Another thing you might see is this reporter's a liar. You can't trust the news he's reporting because he had an affair.
Right.
He's a cheater.
Yeah. You see that, and you see things like the latest line of Hilton commercials with Anna Kendrick as their new spokesperson. I think she's a great actress, but you may not like her. So your attack would be, oh, Hilton must be losing their prestige or their level of quality if they're getting someone like Anna Kendrick to spokesmodel for them, or XYZ product must be a horrible product if they have someone like Kim Kardashian as their spokesperson. You're attacking the company or the product while also attacking the person because you have nothing else to use. Um, for example, if we had a conversation and I said, I like the Man Pendants. We have game day on Fridays. Well, we used to before all this lockdown stuff. And not that this happened, but it's an example that I've seen you at game day. Did you ever do the USO or did you only do the Scotia Rocker?
Yep, I was there. I've been to both.
So it would be if we were discussing the two venues, and I would say, I prefer doing game day at USO. And you would come back and say, well, the space at or the people at USO treat us rudely. Just because when you walk in, the person at the front door didn't say hi to you. So therefore you've attacked the character and the organization with no real basis. Because if I look at you and say, well, I prefer the USO because it's quieter, it's better lit, there's more space for playing the tabletop games we tend to play. There's actual basis there other than, well, the girl at USO is rude, so I don't like the USO. All of USO is now bad because one person was rude to me.
The facilities are bad. The bathrooms are dirty. The water is tainted because the person was rude, right?
Yeah.
I don't actually, none of those things are actually true, but it's actually better in every way. But I'm saying that the USO is worse because I didn't like the person who was there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's when they do what they commonly call like character assassination.
Mm-hmm.
That is the whole basis of ad hominem. Is if I can destroy your character based on one or two things, then I've proven I'm better than you. Such as this current election cycle, I was totally backing Pete Buttigieg. I agreed with his platform on education, healthcare. He's, he was the youngest candidate we've seen in, I think, the entire span of presidential elections. So, he had a fresher take, but he would be attacked for being a gay man. Oh, he can't be president because our nation is set up to have president and first lady, not president and what do we even call his quote unquote husband? So you're going to attack his character because you can't attack his policy because his policy is actually sound.
But you can avoid ever talking about it because you can distract from it. And that's
exactly.
Again.
Yeah, and you see that because, like you will have like the other day I was having a conversation about it. And I said, yeah, I'm bummed out that he dropped out of the race because his plan for healthcare was the most middle ground bipartisan approach that I've seen since the Affordable Care Act failed horribly. And the response was, yeah, but he's, XYZ that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm discussing healthcare. Oh, he's, how are we supposed to explain to young children that he has a husband? Or, yeah, but Trump's policy on foreign defense is XYZ. It's you want to attack this person's character or pivot to some other thing because you can't actually defend your position either for or against the actual root topic.
Yeah. And it works. It certainly works in politics. And not always. Sometimes people stand up through legitimate, not even character assassination, but character flaws. Like when people actually make mistakes, they can admit to these mistakes and say, I did make these mistakes. You can now vote for someone else next time, but my policies are still good. So I'm going to stay in office and keep doing my job, and I'll let the voters decide. And then other people will go, you have to resign. You can't be a governor because you had an affair or were seen in blackface or something. And I'm not here to morally debate how bad those things are and what you should or shouldn't do. But what they're saying is they're pushing back if the person chooses to keep doing their job and not resign their position. And this happens with CEOs too all the time. What they're saying is, heard, I hear you, but I am doing a good job still, in my opinion, and I'm going to keep doing my job, and voters and customers can decide what they think about that instead of giving into the character attack.
Right. I mean, and we saw it recently with, going back to the current president with the whole, one of the women who accused him of sexual misconduct. The very first thing we saw come out of Trump's campaign was she used to be a performer in adult films, therefore she participated in a dirty industry, so she must be non-credible, she must be dirty. Because they can't honestly say this harassment never happened, but rather than admit what happened, it's instantly, a majority of people in the United States look disfavorably on the adult film industry. So we're going to immediately bring up not her claim and not the situation, but we're going to attack what she did to make a living at one point in her life, because then you'll associate a bad industry with the person, so that person must be bad.
Here's one. Blink-182, right? The band. Tom DeLonge. Big time aliens are real advocate, UFO advocate, government hiding, cover up aliens guy. Come on. You can't be seriously listening to Tom DeLonge. He was in Blink-182. He probably just smoked too much pot, and now he thinks aliens are real or whatever. You don't mean to tell me you're going to listen to the guy from Blink-182 about extraterrestrial life. Come on. And then last week, the government released all those UFO tapes, which are the ones that Tom basically based his whole thing off of, and said they're real. We're not even talking about it. Nobody's even talking about the UFOs.
I know. It's crazy. Like, we're so wrapped up in COVID-19 and lockdowns and stimulus checks and trying to attack the president that nobody's like, whoa, wait a minute. UFOs are a thing. Like, which is kind of maybe a good thing, because seeing how a majority of the population tends to respond to COVID, I don't think we're ready for aliens or zombies or anything of that nature yet.
Yeah.
but this year is definitely the Hunger Games. Every month is a new unexpected creature. Like, I was watching the news this morning, which, for us being in Okinawa is the evening news back home. And now they're like, oh, look, this month brought us murder hornets from Asia.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's next? Like, the news is all about these murder hornets, but still, nobody's talking about UFOs right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know, it's crazy. But that's, I guess I'll wrap I'll wrap ad hominem on that. Like, that's a great way to attack the character of Tom DeLonge and say that because it was in a punk rock band or whatever you would categorize Blink-182 as, he can't have any credible information about UFOs.
Right. Or like, I can't think of the name of the movie. The dad character, I want to say is played by John Cusack. I might have the wrong last name. He's a limo driver for, it's the one where they built the big ark kind of boats to save humanity. And so he takes his kids to Yellowstone.
I know what you're talking about. Is it 2012?
Yes. Yes. And so when they're at Yellowstone, he picks up the radio transmission of the conspiracy theorist kind of caricature. And the first thing he says is, that guy can't have any actual information. Listen to what he's talking about. He must be a kook. He must be, one too many beers or one too many joints in his lifetime. And then, no factual basis. And that's something that, again, as a society, it's almost been implanted into us as, elementary school students, that if it's something outside of the norm of our perception, then the person saying it must be crazy, because we're taught in elementary school, there's no such thing as aliens, there's no such thing as UFOs, it's all fake. Area 50, Area 51's all fake. So you're ingrained with the fact that, or indoctrinated almost with the fact that these things don't exist. Therefore, people like Tom Delaney talking about them must be crazy, because we all know as a social fact, there's no such thing as UFOs. And then, like you said, the Pentagon goes, hold my beer, here's some tapes. We honestly don't know what these things are, but it's obviously, it's not a free going projectile because it's not traveling in one direction. So maybe, the caricature of the conspiracy theorist is something that we as a society need to really evaluate where it came from, because again, it goes to, all stereotypes have some small basis in fact. And it also goes back to, as something my dad used to always say to me as a kid when I would get in a fight with my older brother, is we as humans, we tend to pick we tend to pick fights with people over the biggest thing we don't like about ourselves. So a lot of fallacy comes from trying to pick, I have a bone to pick with you, but it's actually the one thing I don't like the most about myself. So I feel like I have to, if I see it in you, I have to attack it. I can't just leave it alone.
I'm gonna have to take some serious time to look at that, what you just said, and try to observe that, because that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with it, and it kind of goes in line with other things that we know to be true, or we believe to be true, like the way that they say people who become doctors almost became serial killers, and people who became firefighters almost became arsonists, and people who became cops almost became criminals, type thing. It's an interesting perspective on it that you probably would have a hard time seeing unless you're a really reflective person who's willing to take an outside look in at yourself. But you might see it in other people, and then you can just believe that it's probably true for you too, which I try to do. Like, hey, if this is true for everyone around me, it's probably true for me too. It's kind of like what you said about if everyone you meet's an asshole, you might be the asshole.
You might be the asshole, because, unless you just really run with a bad crowd of people, it's highly unlikely that the 20 people you have regular contact with are all assholes. Unless either A, you're also one, or you're the only one.
Yep.
But it's one of those things where, like I said, a lot of fallacy comes from trying to call somebody out on the biggest thing you don't like about yourself, or the biggest internal conflict you have with yourself, whether it be, I'm going to attack you for being a Trump supporter. What is it about Trump that I don't like that resonates with me? Is it, it takes a lot of retrospect, but that's like a whole other show. It's like a whole other thing.
We'll have to do that sometime because we've been going for about 2 hours. Time flies when you're having fun. And
it does.
And this was awesome. Thank you very much for joining
Thanks
me
for
this.
having me.
It's
always great to get to have actual conversation with people who can answer back, especially with these quarantine things, or not quarantine, but these restrictions we have going on over on our island, where days I'm not at work, my conversation consists between me and 3 cats, and they don't always answer. So,
yep, I talk to my dog all day, and when my wife gets home, I'm like, "Who had a good day at work? Who had a good day at work?"
No, see, when my husband gets home, it's, "What'd you do today?" And this, and he's like, "Wow, you're really talkative." And I'm like, my conversation buddies have been cats, and they don't answer back.
Yeah.
Like, I can't ask the cat why it just drugged the scratching post across the floor for the last 10 minutes. It's just going to look at me and go, "Because I'm a cat."
Yep. Yep. Cool, man. I really enjoyed this a lot. Again, Jerad, you've did a career in the Army. Thank you for your service, Chaplain Corps. I have a ton of respect for that. This show is all about veterans and getting out of the military and living a fulfilling, happy, successful life after you get out, and sharing stories. And I can't, at this point in time in the world, think of, well, let me be careful with what I say. One of the most important things I can think of right now is understanding better how to communicate with one another. And this is something that I see every day on TV, in the news, in politics, amongst other people, is the use of fallacy arguments. And it ends with no resolution and nobody ever really saying anything. And it's so frustrating. I just had to do something to I don't know, try to make an impact. And you helped me do that today. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, not a problem. I hope, at least one person watching or listening, while we are in this state of being socially distanced, this is the best time that they have to internalize what we talked about today and look at their communication skills. And if it makes at least one person a better communicator when we're allowed to share space again, then we've done what we set out to do.
I totally agree. So if you're listening to this, please let us know if you're that person so we can sleep at night knowing we made a difference. If you have anything to add, please comment. I'll probably sleep fine anyway. I'm a heavy sleeper. Please like.
It's one of those things with fallacy argument when it's actually a really good fallacy argument when the person looks, how do you sleep at night knowing you support or don't support XYZ? The whole begging the question. I like to turn around and go, with 3 cats and a weighted blanket.
Yep, perfect answer.
I'm full of smart alecky things. It's, one of my favorite phrases in life is, if you have a problem with me, call me. If you don't have my number, you don't know me well enough to even have a problem with me.
Oh, I like that.
Which isn't always true, because you and I, we see each other in person and over Facebook Messenger, so not a lot of people even give out their phone numbers anymore. But
let me so one last thing. I heard this the other day from Ricky Gervais. Said the difference between reputation and character is reputation is who people think you are, and character is who you really are. And very few people know your character. And so you should only be concerned with those who do. You should not be concerned with those who know your reputation. So
exactly. And God, it's conversations like these that remind me how much I respect my dad. Now I'm gonna have to call him later. Because the other thing he always said to me growing up, when it comes to telling lies or telling the truth and the man that you want to be in your life, um, the greatest thing, one of the greatest things I picked up from him was the goal is to live your life as if there's a parrot on your shoulder and wondering what that parrot's going to repeat when you're gone. And that just always stuck with me as trying to remember balancing reputation with character is if I'm going to let you know me, then you should know me and not 20 different versions of me. Because A, that's a lot of work to keep up with. And B, I ain't got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. If you can't be yourself around the people you're with, you really need to look at why are you with them.
True that. Okay.
But again, that's a whole nother topic
Yep.
that goes deeper into college classes and degrees and stuff, which I'm more than willing to have that conversation with you at another time.
Yeah, let's do it. I would love to do this again sometime soon. Maybe someday we'll do this in person. For you and I, it's easy. We are on Okinawa together. So,
Right.
soon as
that big an island,
as soon as
throw
the world,
a stone and you might hit the house.
Yeah. As soon as the world gets back to normal. Okay, cool. Wrap it up. Jerad, thank you very much. Seriously. It was an honor. It was a pleasure. And we will talk to you soon.
Awesome, man. Hey, just remember, go Army, beat Navy.
Okay. I'll just leave it at that. We all know the truth.